You said, if you're going to fight, fight naked.
Dude, that's Kim's line. She says that for sure.
I thought it was so funny.
There's been many a naked fights in our 13 years.
Well, we'll leave those to the listener's imagination. Welcome to the Success Flow Podcast, where our mission is simple: to be better each day and relay our findings with other relentless humans defining success for themselves. If that sounds like you, let's begin. I've got a face for podcasting and radio, so
I love it.
we'll have to move it over to.
It's on YouTube though, so you're not going to hide too much. All right, so today let's talk about communication, effective communication, and relationships. So, like,
Very appropriate for a podcast.
right? I mean, when you think about effective communication, like how much, like when you botch a conversation with somebody, like how bad does that suck, right? Like when you're not really listening to somebody and you're just distracted all the time, your phone's going off and the dings and the texts, and you're like having a one-on-one conversation. There's nothing worse than picking up your phone and then just not even hearing the other, and they're still talking, right? And like, especially when you're experiencing it, like you're having a conversation with somebody and they look at their phone and you're like, dude, I'm telling like an incredible story, and you can just tell they're not listening. Like, you know, they're not really intently listening to what you're doing, and it just derails the potential of a relationship for that moment. And there's a study I looked up. It's only like 10% of us actually listen effectively. Like truly listen to like receive as opposed to listen to respond. Most people are listening to respond.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that this could have gone on the superpowers episode too, because it's so rare. And I think it's one thing in person. If you catch someone not paying attention, or you go to the lunch meeting with the phone and you're on the phone, like it's just an immediate turn off for me. I almost lose kind of respect if you can't just be present. I think that comes down to presence. But in this virtual format with Zoom as well, you can tell by folks' eyes, sound of the keyboard. If you have to repeat yourself multiple times, it's a real problem. And if you're not giving someone your presence, it's kind of like, it should make you question why you're having the conversation or in that engagement in the first place.
Totally. There's nothing worse. And especially like, so I do a lot of networking and in-person stuff, and like not only having the conversation and missing out on that, you know, you can tell that they're not listening, but like the nonverbal communication, the way they're standing, right? Like if you're facing someone, eye contact, like if I'm looking you in the eyes and we're facing each other, like we're engaged, we're developing a relationship, we're talking, we're building trust. But when you stand like open-faced, or maybe arms crossed, you're a little guarded maybe, or arms in the pockets, like all that stuff, all those visual cues kind of dictate, or you can see how that person's reacting. I don't know, I'm sure you've seen this too in your world, when you, even on Zoom, you can see them kind of looking away or being distracted in you know, when you're talking. So that nonverbal stuff goes a long way too. And if you want to be inviting, have that stance, that strong stance, arms to the side, moving your hands if you're talking and being engaging. That really helps in driving those relationships when you're trying to build trust with somebody new that you just met.
Yeah, a lot of those physical posture movements are based upon protecting your vitals. So, you know, we cross our arms because we're protecting our vital organs, or we're closed off because we're ready to defend ourselves. These are primal things, right? We're not really concerned that someone's going to go for like a judo chop to the neck, but subconsciously our physical behavior, we're primal beings, and that's where it goes back to. And I think when you're talking about, you know, how we can be perceived like that, my organization I work for we're what we call a matrix model. So you have multiple leaders and multiple teams intersecting as we're approaching a lot of the business we're trying to either win or solve problems for our customers. And it just comes up over and over again that communication and how you're perceived to your team, how approachable you are, how well you're listening to them, and how well you are relaying the problems of the customer is everything in regard to how you approach the deal. Because if you're not communicating those things effectively, or you forget something, or you leave something out, it only compounds as you get further along through the business cycle. So everything that we're talking about here it makes it so important, not to mention it's your internal brand. and external brand that you're presenting yourself with, how well you can communicate your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you build your network, even with longer term relationships that you had over the years, continuing who you are and working on that effective communication, verbally, non-verbally. But as you're building your network, there's a guy, Jordan Adler. I think I've talked about him before. He's a friend of mine, and I know him personally, but he's been on stages, and he's like the number one send out cards relationship marketer. If you don't know anything about send out cards, it's a really cool thing where you can like literally send out personalized cards to anybody, and it's like through an app, and it's really easy. Anyway, he gets on stage and he talks about your network is your net worth. And so if you build a wider network and that you can lean in on or leverage or whenever you need them, the bigger your network is, the more that you're able to succeed in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, because you can ask questions, you can, schedule a one-to-one or whatever with them and kind of and learn from people who've done it. But I love that line, and it goes back to being inviting and engaging and, making sure that you're opening it up for, and then in the workplace, storytelling, right? You said as you've got to be able to effectively communicate and tell the story of the customer that they need, and sharing that story with the people that are supporting that client, or during a prospect, telling the story of how you can help them. You're not selling them on anything. You're telling a story of maybe another customer who had a similar issue and how you guys resolved it. And so storytelling is a huge, massive tool that people can use, and it's being authentic. Like telling real life stories, you don't have to make this stuff up. You just share your experiences, and that goes a long way.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, again, not to go back to the primal stuff too much, but I'm going to. Because it's really important to look at how we're still working with these primal brains. And it's how we passed along information before the written word was created. So we were sitting around campfires passing along how we escaped that attack from this tiger, or how our ancestors came together to figure out how to make this fire in the first place. It's how we passed along information, and it's how we relate. It's not really natural to, even though that's what makes humans different, being able to conceptualize information without an actual reference. That story makes it crystal clear when we can have a metaphor on how this situation relates to something that happened in the past. So I think it's just, it's the easiest way to be able to convey to human beings what we're trying to, that exact situation is something that's happened before similarly.
Dude, have you heard the Ice Cube story? You've read the book Atomic Habits.
Is that James? Yeah, I was going to say James Clear. I recall there's something about the temperature in the room changing, like gradual change or something like that.
Yeah. So we'll take it back to your caveman days. Like think of like the cold winter, right? But we'll talk about like an ice cube in the cave, and it's like 25 degrees in the cave, and maybe not the caveman days, because I'm going to actually turn the notch, warm the place up by 1 degree. And so the story is you've got an ice cube sitting on a table, and it's 25 degrees in the room, and you can see your breath, and you can see it coming in and out, and you're upping. So I'm warming the room up by 1 degree, nothing happens. I warm it up by another degree, nothing happens. And I keep warming this room up, and I keep making these changes, these incremental changes to improve or change the state of the room, but I'm not seeing anything in return. And it's similar to the bamboo story we've talked about, where all of a sudden at 32 degrees, I've now upped it 7 degrees with no presence of change. At 32 degrees, the ice cube starts changing its form, right? It starts melting. And so I tell that story because it's those incremental habits, those incremental changes that you make on a daily basis, and continuing to compound those effects of those changes to build good habits. And that's what James Clear talks about in the book. But it's still telling that story helps people visualize little things, little changes they can make in their lives. And so that story really resonated with me. And just by sharing that with people, it makes them click of whatever that is. Maybe it's going to the gym or working out or whatever, or maybe it's trying to get them on my payroll service. And instead of selling them and, hey, we do great, it's like, hey, if you just made a tweak here and a tweak there, and if we helped here and helped there, and I shared a story about some other client that was in a similar situation, they usually will be like, oh yeah, and the light bulb goes off. And then here we get to become the hero for when they have that, have that need that we can fulfill. So it's a really cool story, and building habits and just what incremental change can do, and honing in on your stories to, again, help people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. And so you build that trust through storytelling.
Absolutely. And I think those when you think of those incremental habits, it's when you get started, like the Ice Cube, like people want to either, instead of just going for a run, they want to run a marathon day one, and then they get discouraged because they can't do it, or their body's wrecked, or completely wiped out. You couldn't do that starting day one. Or instead of just sitting in silence for 5 or 10 minutes, you want to go sit in a Buddhist monastery for a week or a month. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. You've got to start and just start seeing a little bit of the benefits. That's what kind of happened with me 7-ish years ago. It started going down that meditation path. I found it in Men's Health was kind of a low point, and just literally sat there in silence for 20 minutes. Was like, that was interesting. It was interesting enough to keep me coming back to where it started with the habit. And then you start connecting dots. You start saying, okay, well, things that come up when you're not completely distracted or numbing yourself, you start connecting the dots in other areas. Like, oh, wow, I feel a lot better when I'm, exercising this way. Even though exercise was always a part of my life, it wasn't until I started really thinking about and having the silence to reflect on when I was working out or what I was doing to say, oh, okay, now this affects how I'm deciding what I'm going to put in my body, what I'm going to eat. All of these things just kind of compound together. And when you start being able to connect those dots, that's kind of self-communication, right? Like how are you communicating with yourself, and what kind of relationship are you building with yourself to say, I'm going to take care of this asset so I can show up the way I want to show up?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. And when you, like, for instance, Paula, right? I saw those changes, but Paula is your number one. She's your rock. She's in your house. She's your wife, right? So she sees these changes, and maybe you were one guy when you were dating and got married, and now you're making these positive improvements and these changes and, meditation and these things. Like, maybe that's different for her. So I don't know if there's anything in the house or whatever. Like,
it's funny you bring that up.
Like, how do you communicate with her as she learns some of these new things about you?
Yeah. As I was making those changes, that was actually right before I met her. So there's no coincidence when I started, doing this self-work, look who pops up out of nowhere. And that was the person that she started falling in love with, the person that was, doing all this self-work, and it reinforced, that I wanted to keep doing it. And quite honestly, some of the stuff I didn't even want to tell her about because it was relatively new to me. This is a new part of my identity, and got this stoic Irish that's kind of like, okay, why is he sitting in the quiet every morning, breathing really heavy by himself?
I love that little Irish lady.
She's definitely more of a logical left brain, and I am the kind of more right, exploring, creative brain in the relationship. But that was what was important, is she supported all of that. She said, whatever this is doing, he's showing up well. Like, this is really important to him. And she's just doing some of the breath classes with me, get her in the cold plunge every now and then. It's been fun to see, but she's been slower to adopt, but it's kind of crept in. And like we say, slowly, consistently, if you keep showing up and there are positive benefits, it'll hopefully catch on eventually.
Just warm up the room 1 degree and you'll start seeing that change, right?
1 degree.
But yeah, no, Paula's fantastic. And that's all. And if you think about it, when you started making those changes, that opened your mind up. That was allowing you to prepare and create opportunity. And then here she comes into your life and supports you on that. That's incredible. Kim and I, we're coming up on 13 years, and I've thrown a lot at her in terms of ideas and things that I want to do. And like, hey, what about this business, or what about that business, or whatever. Like, I remember one time, I think it was right after our daughter was born. Like, we got 2 small kids, and I go, and this is back when I was really into running and racing, half marathons and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, what if we started a racing company and we did something like the Color Run, and it was a 5K, and we called it, what did I call it? I think it was Motails. So that way, and it was like a play on everyone wears a mohawk or pigtails. And it was just a fun theme thing. And she was like, what the hell are you talking about? But that's kind of how I've been. And I communicate with her quite often of like, I'm going to share these ideas and bounce things all the time and just see what sticks. And as soon as she agrees, oh my gosh, like it's like, all right, let's go. Like, let's freaking get fire under us and go, because my spouse is supporting me in what, these changes and things that I want to do. And then more recently, getting into that mindset work and developing the routines in the morning and all that. And, I think it's incredible when you have that person and that relationship that can support you through those things and be open to change, right? Like, we are all growing as one, and growing together. People are doing it at different levels and different speeds, but when your spouse or the person you're in a relationship with or the closest people around you support you in that, there's nothing better.
You bring up a good point there. And I think that when we're talking about relationships, I got some good advice from you in your early relationship days, and if it wasn't you, this is going to be funny if not, because I don't remember where I got it, but if you're going to fight, well, don't go to bed angry. Everyone says that, right? And like, don't go to bed angry is a good rule, and crosses our mind whenever that opportunity goes. But I think you said, if you're going to fight naked.
Dude, that's Kim's line. She says that for sure.
I thought it was so funny.
There's been many a naked fights in our 13 years.
Well, we'll leave those to the listener's imagination, but it's so true. Like, when you approach a situation, when you're really heated with the person that you care about the most, and it would really make you consider, what the heck are we even fighting about? Like, whose ego needs to die in this situation, or what are we really trying to achieve? And what better way than fighting in the buff?
Dude, I remember when we first started, I won't get into any naked stories, but this was so funny. I just remembered, we were dating, we were in college. I was down at her dorm at U of A, or no, her apartment at U of A. And we came back from a party or something, and we were arguing. I can't even remember what we were arguing about, but what I remember is we were in her room, and she just picked up like her hamper of laundry and just started folding laundry, like during the argument. And then I did the same thing. I picked up like a shirt and just started folding laundry. And then like 2 minutes later, we're still arguing. And I go, are we going to be that couple that folds laundry when they argue? And then we both just started dying laughing, just because it was so, like, it was just so weird and so random. Like, we didn't even know what.
At least you're being productive while you're,
I guess,
while you're getting it out.
I mean, I think in any relationship, you have your ups and downs and you have your arguments. There's no, you may see couples on the surface that are always happy-go-lucky, but behind closed doors, there's always things and, things that you got to work through and challenges. And, people who are married for a long time, they're not married for a long time for no reason. It's because they communicate with each other and, they get each other and they grow with each other. But, that's just a funny story. That's a blast from the past.
When we're talking about like kind of the positive and whatnot, but on that note with communication, when we make mistakes, when we make sizable mistakes, whether it's in business or a relationship, humans have a tendency to clench up their communication. Then we want to kind of hold that in, paint ourselves in the best light, and hope that it solves itself. But I think we talked about quite a bit how real character is built when you communicate in those instances, when you're able to say, I screwed up, and I own that I screwed up, and communicate what you're going to do to change about it in the future, and acknowledge it and make it crystal clear that you're aware of, what happened and how important communication is in those instances. I know that you have some of those as a business owner, as we all do in corporate America as well.
Yeah, when it goes to your personal relationships, that one thing that if you ask Kim, I helped her with her communication. She was definitely one, and I think a lot of people are like this, like you talk about, where you just bottle it up and hope it goes away. And if it doesn't go away, that's when you kind of explode, right? Like something sets you off, something minuscule, like, shrinking a shirt in the dryer, trying to help your spouse out or whatever. But there's been multiple things along the way for the last 30 days or 2 months that weren't openly communicated. So you bottle that up and then explode when something small like that happens. And one of the ways that I've always been able to combat that was just, like you said, just be out and open with it, nip in the bud and just talk about it right then and there. And be like, dude, I totally screwed up. I'm sorry. And this is, it won't happen again. And as you mentioned, the professional setting, when you're in client service and support and, things happen all the time and we make mistakes, clients make mistakes, and you've got to just own up to them right away. And just have that communication of saying, hey, we screwed up. This is how we're going to fix it. This is how we're going to build a new policy, procedure, or whatever, so that way it doesn't happen again. And it's not always on the phone, though. So when you're having those communications, it's written. It's through email a lot of times. And do you want to know what works so well and oftentimes is overlooked in a professional setting in email on how you can calm a client down or calm down, getting a response back when you're trying to help them? Do you know what the best thing is?
What's that?
Dude, add an exclamation point and a smiley face in your email.
Okay. So I've heard mixed reviews on that. Okay.
Hear me out on this one. Like, I'm not saying being obnoxious with your emojis or an exclamation point, but picture this, like an upset client or even a client, it doesn't matter if they're upset. They're just coming at you and say, hey, I need some support. And you respond with, hi, Joe, comma, I can help you with that, period. Let me show you what to do or whatever, right? Instead, try, hi, Joe, exclamation point. I can help you with that, smiley face, and then go on with your resolution steps or whatever. Like, how is that perceived in your, like, in that response from that client? The client now looks at that and says, oh man, this is someone that is happy about their job or their career or whatever, or happy to support me and find a resolution. I feel confident in that. And I actually had a Twitter exchange with this guy about this one thing. And he literally called me out. He goes, that is the most childish and embarrassing asinine thing I've ever heard in my life, to use an exclamation point and a smiley face in a work email. Right. And I'm like, shit, how do I respond to this? But I just responded back and I said, I just painted that exact picture. And I said,
with an exclamation point and a smiley face.
Yeah, dude, I just exclamation point and smiley face. That was it. No, I responded back and I go,
double down,
go all in. I go, what looks better if you're trying to support a client? And it says, a client reaches out for support, just like it's described. And you say, sure thing, period, happy to help, versus sure thing, exclamation point, happy to help, smiley. Does that perception give off to the client that you are happy to support them and you're going to find a solution, versus the other way where they're just responding and they'll get back to me or whatever, right? So this guy, no joke, he goes, well, agree to disagree, whatever. Like, I understand that obviously that works in your world, or other people wouldn't do it or keep up with it. He hits me back 45 days later. And I'm like, who is this guy, right? Like, I was like, why is he responding to me again? He hits me back. He goes, dude, I need to bow down to you. I just implemented this for the last 6 weeks since we had this exchange. And the perception of happiness I get from my team internally, as well as clients externally, has been a major impact on my business. So thank you, sir. And I was like, holy moly, like, it actually worked for him. And I thought it was just really cool, more so of like him implementing something that he was completely closed off on. So that was cool. So part of communication, keep an open mind, learning from others, and throw an emoji and an exclamation point in there every now and then.
I love it. And I think, like, on that specific note, like, if you are kind of, when communicating with someone like that, it shows how if you're not even open to another way of approaching a problem, how that can, think about how early he could have adopted that and given it a try, as opposed to kind of waiting and it probably was a last resort when he was like, maybe need to switch something up, and finally got those effects he was looking for.
Yeah, it's just the perception of happiness, right? Like, written communication is so difficult to read between the lines and understand the tone of how people are responding, and even internally with your chats and all that stuff. So when you can add some expression in written communication, it definitely goes a long way. It just builds that trust. It opens it up to build that positive environment and knock down any barriers. But in your world, have you experienced any communication barriers with people? And, do you have a story or anything that, and how you resolve that, maybe with some of your clients or, team members?
Yeah, as I mentioned with the matrix model that I work in, we really have this, it's extreme, like, retention is everything in software SaaS sales. And when we look at supporting a customer after deployment, it can get a little bit, there are differences in opinion on how to go about that. And so with maintaining that relationship has always been very important to me, because it's how you can build ongoing relationships with customers, is through that customer success individual. So you got to be lockstep and really, like you're saying, have kind of a uniform way that you're communicating, set cadences quarterly to review. And I've had some, issues in the past on how we've been kind of responding to these, the support of the customer, like what the customer is asking for. And we have to also know and respect the roles of customer success versus sales. But that approach has been extremely important to say, this is what we're witnessing, and these are the promises that we delivered. And we have this all documented when we have the handoff, which has helped a lot. These are the problems we said we were going to solve. This is what we committed to doing over the course of the relationship while you're successfully deployed and onward. It's kind of like an ongoing, it's a contract. I mean, we sign actual contracts for the software, but this is an agreement between us, the salesperson, what the customer desired, and how the customer success team is going to support. And if we have that all dialed in, we can always refer back to them and be like, how are we doing? How are we doing, all three of us, on holding up our end? And I think that's important. It's not necessarily, we need this written down and these are rules and commandments that we're going to abide by, but it's it's back to the accountability a little bit, along with, this is the communication standard that we set. How are we doing? And it's proved to be really helpful. One of our leaders instilled that kind of process, that customer, the handoff process, which has been extremely important in setting expectations. And I think it results in a lot of happy customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, building those internal relationships as well as external relationships is twofold, where when you've got a strong relationship with a new customer, a new prospect, they potentially know someone else who needs your services, and you can grow your business through referrals. And as a salesperson, the more referrals you can get as opposed to hunting, it's like farming, right? It's like laying down the foundation.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, exactly. And laying down the foundation and nurturing your crops and just it's fruitful when you've got a full field now, instead of going one by one hunting. And relationships really build that farming experience. And when you get back to people that want to refer you because of those services. But internally, when you have those handoffs from department to department to department, and you share the story of the client as they're going through that, that workflow or that cycle, and doing it in a positive way. So even if there's an issue, in a positive way, hey, here's how I would recommend we resolve this, or handing it off in a warm way. It really goes a long way. And I think, reflective questioning, when someone's saying like, hey, I'm struggling with this, or how do I'm really stressed out or whatever, right? Like, how do you respond when you're, when you're working with somebody who's coming at you with negativity?
I know that was on our docket, and the importance of addressing assumptions when we talked about this, and how we can walk into a trap when we're assuming things. I'll never forget being a kid and my mom, because I remember the exact restaurant we were in, she said, what happens when you assume? And you break down the word, and so you make an ass out of you and me.
Yeah.
And my mom didn't cuss that much, so it was a very impactful moment on the assumptions piece. But when we're trying to, that can lead us into a rabbit hole, right? That's kind of an ego thing. We think that we know things. We have an idea of the situation, and we're going to lead from what we know. And we talk about effective communication. You brought up some pretty good tools in regard to reflective questioning, which I took from not only a internal communication, but sales perspective, is very helpful. And then I statements, which I think go back to middle school for me, Catholic middle school. They taught us that out the gate, and it makes more sense as an adult. One of those things that lands a little bit more when you get older. But have you been using those within the organization?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when someone says, "Hey, I can't handle this situation," or they're struggling with certain things, it's never, "Oh, let me jump in and help you," right? Because that doesn't help anybody. If you want to develop, learn, and grow, other people, or help them through that path, stay on that path of development. It's more of, okay, well, let me dive into this a little more. Like, what exactly is causing the issue, and how can we collectively together come up with a resolution for you to become a little bit more efficient? And those I statements are like, well, I believe that this would be helpful for you, or whatever, right? And so you have a little bit of ownership on how you're responding, and not jumping in every time to save that person, unless it's absolutely necessary. But you got to be able to have the wits about you to understand that is what helps them grow and develop. If you help them recognize what the solution is and help them with those steps, but they're telling you and making it seem like it's their idea, when you're kind of guiding them through that conversation through reflective questioning. But it's a ripple effect, right? The more you can grow and develop, the stronger they get, the more they develop great relationships with the clients, with their personal networks or whatever. And even like us, as we develop our network, and it just, everything floats up to the top and continues down that path towards success. And I think when you have effective communication, and it affects all areas of your life in a positive way.
Yeah, I think that those, when we talk about, whether you refer to it as reflective questioning, or we talk about a lot of third and fourth, fifth layer questions, when the first couple of questions are kind of typically either softballs, or you're just really formulating your actual thoughts about the situation. It's not until you get to that third, fourth, fifth layer when you actually start to uncover what you're really trying to express. And until you get to that point in the sales conversation, I'm just looking at whether it's sales or an inter-organization relationship conversation. That's when you get to what's the deep seat of the problem or obstacle or issue that you're trying to resolve. It takes that third, fourth layer to actually get to it. So we always talk about that, how it takes a lot of effort and work to get through a dialogue that's going to get to that point. And we oftentimes like to give up or just kind of take our assumptions and move along with the conversation before we get to that point.
The easy way, right? We all want it to be easy, but when you have a growth mindset, you're a knowledge seeker, you're trying to develop, and you can't let them off the hook as a leader too easily. And as you're growing and making that mindset change or that shift of how you navigate your life and navigate your work, you got to be open to interpretation and open to conversation and learning and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let me go in and do that, instead of saying, hey, can you do it? Ask for help and get advice, but take ownership of, what you need to do. And so anyway, I think effective communication, strong relationships. I think that's a wrap, dude. I love it.
I think it's a wrap too, man. Lots of good nuggets here. Give us a follow. Give us that feedback. We're looking for what type of topics you want to hear from the Success Flow podcast, and we'll look forward to catching up with you next week.